very good evening to you. Welcome to another Newsmaker Live broadcast. We're very much into the 22nd season of this program. My name is Timothy Polio. We go up until 10 o'clock this evening, at which time we'll be concluding with the clip that peaked. And of course, during the course of NML, we'll be taking your calls. So please stand by. I'm saying we because I have a special guest in studio, and he has just written a book. And the book is basically addressing prime ministers. Maybe this current prime minister, future prime ministers, and he's pointing them in a direction on a range of issues. We'll be focusing on those matters during the course of the broadcast, and of course I'll be speaking to him directly on his own ambitions. I'm referring there to Dr. James Fletcher, former Minister for Sustainable Development, Energy, Science and Technology. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you, Tim. Good to be here, and good evening, everyone.
And before we speak about your book, what have you been up to after the last general election of 2016?
Well, I've been running my own company. It's a consulting company called Soloricon. I founded it actually in 2007 after I left office as cabinet secretary. It went into abeyance when I worked at the OECS Secretariat, and then when I became a minister. So I resurrected it immediately after June 2016. I've been doing quite a bit of consulting in the areas of climate change, water policy, energy policy. Those three in particular have kept me very occupied for the last 18 months. So it's been an exciting journey. I've been able to pick my own stresses, travel almost as much as I used to, and I've done, for me, some very rewarding work within the region and also outside of the region.
So you're not suffering from any kind of political go-well?
Absolutely not. No, nothing like that. No.
But the fact that you served as a former permanent secretary, I think I remember as PS in agriculture. And then you were also cabinet sec, and then became a government minister. I think before that you were at the OECS Secretariat. Would you say that you used those platforms, to introduce you to the wider world, and you're benefiting from this right now? Moving from being a minister, and now you are so inundated with work and so occupied.
It has helped. I think what has happened is that I've learned every step of the way. As a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, my experiences were limited to that sector. But I think what I learned there was how the public service operates, what it is to manage a ministry, what it is to manage a ministry with workers, with public officers, dealing with the myriad issues that a permanent secretary has to deal with, and that was a very good introduction to the public service. Although I'd served as a public officer before, because immediately I returned from doing my PhD, I worked at the research division of the Ministry of Agriculture in the Produce Chemist Laboratory for 4 years. So you could say that I've had a full orientation in the public service when, as you rightly pointed out, when I stopped being permanent secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, I then became cabinet secretary. And that was an interesting experience because I was able to see how the cabinet operated. I was able to see how some of the issues that we took for granted as public officers, as senior public officers, how they were dealt with by the cabinet of ministers, and the various nuances that were brought to bear in the decision making of cabinet. Very often a technical person or a lay person sees things as either black or white. You figure, why them fellas are doing that? To me, that looks simple. And then when you're in the cabinet, you realize, no, it's not that simple, because there's so many other things at play. There's so many agendas, so many constituencies, so many issues, so many policy considerations. So that, I think, was quite an eye-opener for me. When I went across to the OECS Secretariat, again, I saw things at a regional level. And it also forced me out of my comfort zone, because at the OECS Secretariat, I had responsibility for not just the environment, which was really right up my alley, but also things like education, health, sports policy, social policy. So I had to get up to speed on these things very quickly, but not just from a solution perspective, but the entire OECS 6 independent member states plus the 3 overseas territories. So that was quite a good experience, because I also got to interface with the development partners in a direct way, people like UNDP and UNICEF and the World Bank, and seeing how you could mobilize funding from them, and seeing how you present a case to them to get projects approved on behalf of your member states.
But Doc, is a case where people want a final outcome. they want to see the rewards. I mean, it's all the effort that is taking place at the level of the sub-region, at the level of government, at the level of various institutions and so on. People are telling me that they're not seeing the rewards and the outcome of this also so-called hard work, generally speaking. They want food on the table and they want to be employed. They want to be in a position where the children can benefit from scholarships and so on, and they're not seeing the returns.
It's a fair question. I think, and it's something that politicians always have to be aware of. That while you look at the long-term policy issues and the policy considerations, you have to understand that there is citizenry that has to be addressed. When you're running a country, it's not like you can. I actually gave this analogy, I think, in the book. When one government changes and another one comes in, it has to be a seamless transition. So it's not like you go to the jazz festival and one band has performed, and before the other band comes in, you have the stage men who come in and they fine-tune all the instruments, make sure that the sound levels are right, and then when the next band comes in, they just seamlessly go through. It's really like somebody doing open heart surgery. You have to keep the patient alive. So whilst you're doing the interventions that you hope will lead to a positive outcome down the road, but you have to ensure that the breathing takes place, that all of the bodily functions continue to operate, and that's really what you have to do. You always have to keep mind of the fact that there are people who are struggling, there are people who want to do all of these things, who want to see themselves improve. And I think sometimes we tend to focus too much on the policy issues. And I had a very, very interesting encounter once with the head of UNICEF. And he said to me, he's Norwegian, he was head of UNICEF for the Caribbean and Eastern Caribbean and Barbados. And he said to me, Jimmy, we became very good friends. He said, the Caribbean is a unique place. I have never seen an area where technocrats are so good at articulating a problem. They articulate a problem very, very well. I go to meetings and I hear a problem laid out in the best possible terms. The only problem is I come back in a year's time and 2 years' time and they're still articulating the same problem and they have not moved forward. And I think that's one of the issues that we have. There's an implementation deficit. We are very good at articulating problems, very good at determining what needs to be done and what the problem is, but not good enough at implementing and solving the problems. And I think that is where we really need to up our game.
What, because there are some certain risks involved that those technocrats are avoiding?
I don't know that there are risks involved. I just don't think we are oriented in that manner. I think there isn't enough of a sense of urgency, and that sense of urgency has to come from the very top. That, okay, these are the goals. The problem is we're not goal-oriented. So every government that comes into office with a manifesto. It says that these are all the things that it will do. But that manifesto is more to get into office than to actually implement when you're in office. And I think what you need to see is that every prime minister sits with his ministers and says, these are the things, these are priority areas that we must achieve over the 5 years. And every year there must be an accounting. And that minister now must sit down with his technical officers, be it his permanent secretary or his chief technical officers, and say that these are deliverables. These are the things that we must deliver on. And we must have regular meetings. And that's what I did. If you speak to the people who worked with me, my permanent secretaries in both ministries, they will tell you that we had regular meetings. And I always wanted to know that if I was meeting with someone, I could speak as fluently on an issue as my technical officers could, because I needed to be able to account for what was going on. And I think you need to get much more of this. You need to have very clear goal setting that takes place, and people have to be
focused. A government minister?
As a government minister, as a permanent secretary, every single person must be responsible for implementing certain goals. Doesn't matter whether you're a clerk, whether you are an accountant, whether you are the legal officer or you're the permanent secretary. Everybody must know what their goals are, what are the targets that have been set, and these targets must work towards a much broader goal, which is the goal of the ministry or the goal of the government.
In the book, you did admit that you have been involved in putting together manifestos in the past. How much work goes into that? And being realistic, is it a case where you just want to entice the voters, or you are basically doing something and you know for certain that those targets could be met, they are plausible ones?
Well, the manifestos that I was involved in, and that's everyone except the Contract of Faith, so 2001, 2006, 2011, 2016, I never approached it as an exercise just to win votes. And the the people that I worked with, people who made submissions to that manifesto, and the Prime Minister or the political leader who oversaw the production of that manifesto, never said to me that you need to produce a manifesto that sounds good so that you could go out and win votes. I would not have associated myself with anything like that. The problem is that not everything that you implement, or not everything that you say that you will do, can you implement. And I think, again, that's something I speak of in the book. When you get into office, there's certain realities that you are confronted with, and you have to own up to the electorate and say, there are certain things that we said we were going to do that we really cannot do, at least not yet. And there are certain things that we said we were going to do that we didn't have all of the information, and we need to now backtrack.
But we keep hearing that, and that's a common thing we hear. We did not have the information. We did not have the information. We're in an era where information should be readily available.
But it's not. It's not. What information can you get? Because the information that you can get as a journalist is the same information that an opposition leader can get right now. Can you get information on anything other than what you see in the budget?
So therefore, do you think we need a Freedom of Information Act?
Absolutely. You need not just a Freedom of Information Act, but it's more than the act. It is people having an understanding, people who work in the public service having an understanding that information is public information. So even without an act, you ought to be able to call a government office and say, I need X amount of information. I need information on this, on banana production over the last 20 years, on supermarket purchases over the last 15 years. And they ought to be able to point you to a digest, a website, or somewhere where you can come in and get that information.
But depending on who is asking, that public officer will be very suspicious.
It should not matter. It should not matter whether it's Timothy Poullier, the journalist who's looking to do an expose on the government and to see whether and to fact check some of the things that the Minister of Agriculture has said, or it's some research, some student doing a master's or PhD degree who wants to see what the trend has been in purchases of local produce. It really ought not to matter. And that's not the job of a public officer to filter information and decide there's certain people who should not have access to it.
So therefore, things will not change on their own when it comes to the dissemination of information from the public service in St. Lucia. Why do you think we've not had a Freedom of Information Act in St. Lucia? Because reference have been made to this, I think, by the previous St. Lucia Labour Party administration. You already have it in Antigua and I think Trinidad and Tobago and the Bahamas as well. Why not St. Lucia?
I don't know. I mean, that's a simple answer I can give you. I see no reason why.
But why wasn't it a priority for you, Minister of Information and Broadcasting?
It was a priority for me, but it wasn't a priority in the Ministry of Legal Affairs because there were a lot of other pieces of legislation that at the time they deemed more important. My priorities were freedom of information. I also wanted a broadcasting bill, which I never got. I wanted a change in energy legislation that I never got. So it has to do, first of all, you have an issue with the Department of Legislative Drafting. There are never enough legislative drafters to do the work that is required. And legislative drafters are in short supply throughout the Caribbean. And for me, that is one of the things that an administration needs to do. If you come in and you see, okay, there's a bottleneck, then we solve that bottleneck. Because not having these laws in place are really constraining, in the case of a Freedom of Information bill, the ability of the electorate to get access to information. It's also hindering your work as a government because it's a little arrogant of any government to believe that the totality of the brain trust, the totality of the intellectual capacity of the country resides within the 14 people who sit in the cabinet. That's not the case. The minority of the brain trust resides there. There are many more intelligent people, many more capable people sitting outside the cabinet than are sitting inside the cabinet. Why not make use of them? Why not get them to manage information and come up with ideas that feed into you? And I think it's the arrogance that very often we have as politicians and as governments that believe that we are omnipotent, we cannot fail, we're omniscient, we know everything, and we're infallible, we can't make mistakes. And I think that is something that has to change. And the way you change that is by making information available to people, by educating people.
Do you think suspicion is also a word we could use there on the part of politicians, based on because people are trying to ferret out information and so on, that they might appear to have ulterior motives?
I can tell you something
to uproot the government.
I can use myself as an example. I was never worried about any information that any journalist, it could be the most investigative and inquisitive journalist like yourself, or somebody who's just looking to write a piece, could dig up on any work that I did in energy, in water, in public service or anything, because as far as I was concerned, the information was there. There was nothing untoward that was going on, and making that information available would only enhance the work that I am doing. And I think when you're suspicious about making information available, it's because you think that you have something to hide. And I don't think anybody who's worried about making information available it cannot be for the right reasons. There are certain bits of information that you cannot ever make available. So somebody's tax returns can't be the subject of a public inquiry. Somebody's health records cannot be the subject of a public inquiry. Somebody's police record cannot be the subject of a public inquiry. So there are certain things that you ring fence and you say, okay, that information is confidential information and can never find itself in the public domain, or unless it is for some criminal matter that's being investigated. But everything else ought to be accessible. Once you go through the right processes and you make the right applications, then there should be a particular period of time within which you are guaranteed to get that information.
Isn't it safe to say that the previous St. Lucia Labour Party administration of 1997 started on a good footing as far as the dissemination of information? It might have lost its way thereafter.
I think any government that gets into power and gets out of office loses its way. I mean, it's in the eyes of the public, there are certain things that you did well or that you promised and that you have not delivered, and you've lost your way. I can't say that the 1997 Labour administration lost its way where information dissemination was concerned.
I'm just saying it started on a positive footing. It promised a lot. You had frequent press conferences,
right.
But then this diminished. It waned a bit from 2001 thereabout.
Right, and I think it speaks to another issue, which is how do you deal with information dissemination? Information dissemination is not just a freedom of information bill, but it's how accessible you are to the media, how accessible you are to journalists. So you're right. I mean, if I now make myself inaccessible to you, if when you want to speak to me about something I say I don't have a comment or I can't speak with you, then you start building a bit of a resentment because you figure I'm fresh, who's mate here, want to talk to me anymore, or you figure I have something to hide. So absolutely. So not presenting yourself and making yourself available for questioning and to answer questions and to respond to inquiries can never be a good thing.
After the June 2016 general election, and Prime Minister Alan Shastny was putting his cabinet together, there are whispers, people are suggesting that you should have been included. You should have been given an opportunity to serve in a cabinet headed by Mr. Shastny. Would you have accepted?
Well, it was quite flattering and quite humbling to hear that. I did hear some of that. But there were certain, I think, practical issues that would make that difficult, if not impossible, to happen. I was a member of the St. Lucia Labour Party. I was a senator in the St. Lucia Labour Party. I was a member of the executive of the St. Lucia Labour Party. I sat in a cabinet of a St. Lucia Labour Party government. It would be extremely difficult and awkward for the people who were sitting in Prime Minister Alan Shastny's cabinet to discuss matters with me there. I think they would find that, okay, we're not quite sure where his allegiances are. His friends are still the people that he sat in the cabinet with. They would be critiquing and criticizing and dismantling projects that I sat in the cabinet and approved and thought worthy of implementation. So it would be awkward for them. It would be awkward for me. So I mean, I heard the discussions. I found them very flattering. I was very pleased because it meant that people saw me in a manner that transcended party politics, but I think there were some practical issues that would have made me serving in a cabinet immediately after a general election in a cabinet of the United Workers' Party impossible. I don't see that the members of Mr. Shastny's cabinet would have been comfortable with that, and I certainly would not have been comfortable with it because they're two different parties.
But you were not approached at all?
Absolutely not. No,
okay.
Never.
Were you ever a member or supporter of the United Workers' Party?
No.
Okay.
My father was. My father was a supporter of the United Workers' Party. He and John Compton were very good friends, and he and George Mallet were very good friends. Mr. Mallet was a very close family friend. But my grandfather was also the Labour Party rep for Choiseul, Mr. Gilbert Mason. So I have paternal roots in the Labour Party, and I also have connections with the United Workers' Party. Some of my best friends, and I think that are United Workers' Party supporters, and I think that's really what we have to stop in this country. We have to stop when we look at people as seeing them as either Labour or Flabo, UWP, SLP, red or yellow. When I look at UTM, I see a St. Lucian. And then after I see a St. Lucian, I see a journalist, and I see a journalist who's practicing his craft and who wants to be the best at what he does. I don't care whether you are UWP or SLP. That is of no consequence to me whatsoever. And I think that should not matter until you get to an election. When I'm campaigning for your vote, then yes, I want to know that you support me. And if you don't support me, then I will work my hardest to make sure that you support my party and you support my policies. But once the election is ended, I could not care less who you are. I have to stop seeing you as a voter, and I now have to start seeing you as citizenry. I have to stop seeing the population as electorate, and I have to start seeing them as citizens. And the work that I do has to be on behalf of the citizens, all 170,000 people who reside in St. Lucia, not the 60,000 who voted for me, or not against the 40,000 who did not vote for me. We have to transcend this. And I think that is part of the problem that we have in St. Lucia, that the political campaigning and the viewing people through colored lenses continues way past an election. And I know I'll get phone calls saying, oh, but Labour are doing it. We both Labour Party and the United Workers' Party do it. And I think it's something that has to stop. We have to stop seeing each other as colors, and we have to start seeing each other as St. Lucians.
Where do you start on this issue as a country, as a people? Where do we start?
We start by identifying the challenges that are common and that do not change regardless who's in power. Education, jobs, as you mentioned, people want to see their children go through school and get the best education that they can get. Healthcare, you want to know that if you fall ill, that you can get the best possible healthcare and it's affordable. Security, you want to know that when you leave here and you're driving to your home, that the entire road and the entire track to your home is secure. When you get out of your car, it's secure. You want to know when your children go to school, it's secure. You want to know that the infrastructure that you use is secure. You want to know that issues like climate change, that we are addressing them, and that they will not take away your home, or the next hurricane will not pass and wipe out everything that you have and the government can't respond. These are things that do not matter whether you UWP or SLP. So to reduce everything we do to politics is really not helping us. There's an analogy I gave at the book launch, and for me that's the most appropriate analogy I could come up with. I don't know whether you've ever seen a hamster in a cage. Yeah. Hamsters just run. They move their little legs and they go nowhere because they're in this wheel that's turning. And sometimes I look at St. Lucia and I get the sense that we hamsters in a cage because the country is not progressing. We're doing a lot. There's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of agitation, there's a lot of halikase and tiwimete going on. But is the country moving forward? Are we moving forward with healthcare? Are we saying to people that, yes, okay, we have to open a new dialysis unit, but you should not wait until you get to the point of end-stage renal disease. You really need to tell people that we have to take better care of ourselves to reduce on the incidence of chronic non-communicable diseases, the diseases that will cause you to have kidneys that fail. Are we doing these things? And that's a discussion that we need to have in the period between elections. And we cannot always be in a stop-start mode. Every time a new government comes in, you have to stop everything and restart. We're not going anywhere.
How do you stay above the political fray?
How do I personally stay above the political fray? By focusing on St. Lucia and by focusing on what's best for St. Lucia, by treating everyone as equal regardless who they support. I really couldn't care less who anybody supports. By doing the best that I can for my country, by representing my country every time I'm out there to the best of my ability, by working with everyone, so it doesn't matter who you are, what party you support. If you ask me for assistance and it is within my sphere of competence, I will give it to you, and I will offer advice. So, and for me, that's the most important thing. And that's how I stay above the political fray, because I wasn't born Labour or UWP. I was born a St. Lucian in Marion Street in Castries, and that's the most important thing to me.
You think what is helping is that you're so preoccupied that you do not have time to waste on mundane issues?
You mean the devil finds work for idle hands?
Yeah.
No, I don't think that's what it is. I think that's just my personality. I think I've always, I studied outside St. Lucia. I did my first degree in Canada. I did my PhD in England. I always wanted to return to St. Lucia. I always wanted. There was no place else I wanted to come back to work but St. Lucia. I never thought of studying, of going anywhere else after I studied, because I felt I had a contribution to make to my country. And that has always been what has guided me. So no, I don't think it has to do with the fact. I keep myself preoccupied because I have work to do, and I could very easily cool out and loaf, but so no, it has nothing to do with the fact that I'm preoccupied. It has everything to do with the fact that I think working on behalf of St. Lucia and St. Lucians is the most important thing for me, as it should be for everyone. When you do better, Tim, I do better. When I do better, somebody else should be doing better. And that's how I think we should see ourselves, as each one of us working and pushing that boulder up the hill, so that eventually we reach the summit and we say, okay, you know what? We can now help somebody else. We cannot always be seeing ourselves as countries that are Bwakase in need of special and differential treatment. Yeah, by dint of our geography and our size, there are always certain things that will hold us back. But at some point, we should be in a position to help someone else. We should be in a position to graduate so we can say, okay, you know what? People keep talking about Singapore and Malaysia and Taiwan. We can be the Singapore and the Malaysia and Taiwan, not with the same conditions, not with the same restrictions that Singapore and Lee Kuan Yew imposed on its people, but certainly with a different set of disciplines and with a better focus and with a better understanding of who we are as St. Lucians and where we need to go. And that's my only preoccupation.
But do you think we are encumbered by self-pity?
No, why?
The fact that we are small, limited human resources, limited financial resources, and so on. We have problems in education and so on, and then we might be telling ourselves that we really cannot get ourselves out of that rut that we're in right now.
But Tim, the education system in St. Lucia, it produced you, it produced me, it produced Dr. Kenny Anthony, it produced Mr. Stevenson King, it produced Sir Derek and Sir Arthur, even if some of us may have gone overseas to study at some point. But the education system in St. Lucia produced us. It produced everyone you see. It produced Javed Samuel, who is a brilliant young man from Vieux Fort, who is one of the foremost cybersecurity experts in Silicon Valley right now. It produced so many people that are blazing a trail. So there's nothing wrong with the education system per se. It has deficiencies, and I don't see why we should focus on the deficiencies and not celebrate the fact that we have something that, yes, needs tweaking, yes, needs adapting to the 21st century, so that you now, in addition to the pure academic skills, you now have to teach children conflict resolution, you have to teach them teamwork, you have to teach them how to be innovative, you have to teach them how to use information, you have to teach them what Toffler speaks to as the new literacy, which is the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn, because we're living in a world where things are changing so quickly. These are things that our education system has to do. But at its core, there's nothing wrong with our education system. At its core, there's nothing wrong with the teachers. We have some of the best teachers in St. Lucia. So let's not say that there are problems where there are not problems. Let's focus on where things need to be built up. So I don't think there's a self-pity. I think really, to be honest, it's a lack of focus. It's a lack of purpose. It's a lack of determining what we want to do, how we want to get there, where we want to go. And it's a lack of all of us working towards that one goal. I think that's what it is.
You're watching Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television with me, Timothy Polion, and my guest, former government minister Dr. James Fletcher, and also author of Governing in a Small Caribbean Island State. When we return, we'll be focusing on the book. So please, stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. You're watching Newsmaker Live on DBS Television with my guest, once again, Dr. James Fletcher, the author of Governing in a Small Island State. What motivated you to write this book, a 110-page book?
I think my experiences that, as I said, I've been able to see government operate from very different angles. One my first experience actually was as a junior clerk working in the Ministry of Finance, Inland Revenue Department, as soon as I left A-level college. And that was quite an experience. I actually recounted it in my book launch. I used to come down on summer holidays. On one summer holiday, instead of positioning me at Inland Revenue, I was asked to stand up at the corner of Jeremy Street and Bridge Street, and then also at the corner of Chaussee Road and Riverside Road, and count cars, because the government was looking to see whether they should put in traffic lights. And I could tell you the number of phone calls my parents got asking whether I was okay with that going off, because this boy went to school and they just see him counting cars with a piece of paper. So, and to this day, there are no traffic lights in either one of those two places. So you ask yourself whether your work was of any benefit then. And then coming in in the Ministry of Agriculture as a middle management officer, and then permanent secretary, minister, then at the OECS. So I was fortunate in being able to see government work from very many different angles. And I think that gave me a 360 perspective of government. And I felt that writing about governing in a small Caribbean island state was something that I needed to do, because I had certain very strong feelings on the way in which we do things. And again, consistent with my whole approach that this has to be about governance, this has to be about improving governance, it has to be about charting a development agenda that is very inclusive and that puts St. Lucia and St. Lucians at the core, because it's something I feel very strongly about, that we have to cherish what we have in this country. We have to cherish the human resources that we have. We have to cherish the assets that we have. And we have to, whatever we do has to be a celebration of that and has to build on that. And I think we have all of the assets that we need to be able to move forward. So this book really was my expressing these thoughts in 110 pages and saying how I felt based on some of the things that I'd seen, based on some of the things that I've seen in other countries, that not just St. Lucia, but any small Caribbean island state, some of the simple things that can be done. That's why I try to make it a simple read. No chapter is too long. The language is uncomplicated, and hopefully anyone reading it will say, you know what, I think I can do that. Or you know what, that's not that difficult. So I'm hoping that when you read it, that was the impression it left you with.
It was. And I see you focusing at prime ministers. And one of the issues that you raised, it was on page 39, and you wrote, I'm not a fan of CIP. Although I once argued in favor of one in Parliament, my position has changed significantly.
Yes.
When did your position change?
That's interesting because actually Dr. Stephen King did a review of the book at my launch, and that he actually referenced that quote as to show how important it is to admit you've made a mistake when you make a mistake. And my position changed, I think, very soon after the June 2016 general election, when I had a chance to reflect on what the CIP would do to St. Lucia. And it's a curious thing about being in government, and again, it's something I touch on in the book. You have to be able to step back sometimes, Timothy, and see what's going on around you. You can get so caught up in what you're doing. You could start believing your own hype and your own spin so much that you become a little oblivious to what people around you are saying. You believe that you have all the answers. You believe that what you're doing is best for the people. And you need to step back and you need to see what this can do. And it's not just CIP, it's anything else. And I think leaving government and stepping back and seeing what CIP could do to the country, what CIP could do as far as land prices are concerned, that this generation may probably be the last generation that will be able to buy land at an affordable price in St. Lucia. Because if you have CIP coming in and you have people coming in and speculating in land, buying land so that they can get passports, they're not going to sell that land back to you at a reasonable price. They will. It's an investment for them. So seeing how CIP can cause a total disenfranchisement of St. Lucians, seeing how we're now selling our identity for, and it doesn't matter what the price is. It doesn't matter whether it's $100,000 or $150,000. We are saying that to be St. Lucian costs $150,000 or costs $200,000. When I took a step back, I realized, no, I can't say that. My patrimony, my citizenship is supposed to mean a lot more. It's supposed to be valued a lot more than that. This is a country of 170,000 people, 238 square miles, a finite land mass. This is not a country of unlimited or vast tracts of savanna or desert or other lands that need to be developed. We have a very small land mass, and I think what CIP can do is really skew our development prospects, and it devalues what we are as St. Lucians, who we are as St. Lucians. Yes, it allows us to bring in money, but I think what we're gaining for that money certainly is not anywhere near what we're giving up for that money.
One of your critics, I'm sure, will say that it was politically expedient then, that's during the reign of the previous SLP administration, for you to support CIP.
And again, I'm saying to you that being part of a government, you need to step back. And I would hope that if any time I find myself in government again, I do not find myself in that same trap of only seeing what it is that's in front of you and what you want to do, and being able to step back and listen to what people are saying and to view things from not just the angle of what you think is right, but what other people think may not be right or what other people think is necessary.
But if you had opposed the CIP then, don't you think that you, a dissenting voice, that would not be acceptable?
Oh, it would I could have said to the Prime Minister that I do not support the CIP. I could have said so in Cabinet, and the Cabinet would then have still decided that it's going with CIP. There's a certain thing in Cabinet called collective responsibility, and it would go forward as a Cabinet decision that the government is moving forward with CIP. When the matter came to the Senate, I could do one of two things. I could either ask the Prime Minister to allow me to vote on conscience, or if he did not allow me to vote on conscience, I could abstain. So there are avenues that are available to you. I did not have to exercise any of these avenues then because I was not of that mind then. It would be a little curious and a little interesting now if it were to happen, how it would play out. But I supported it back then. I will make no apologies, and I'll tell you I supported CIP when CIP was raised. I do not support CIP anymore. I don't think.
If things do not work out, if things go awry as far as the CIP is concerned, that I imagine can work on your conscience, play on your conscience.
any bad decision that you make, or any decision that you make that you think was the wrong decision, and it ends up costing you or costing somebody else or costing the country, is certainly something that you regret. I think the most important thing is to admit that you've made an error, rather than to just bluster and bully your way through and say, I did absolutely nothing wrong and I stand by what I do, even when you see things crumbling around you. And for me, that is something that you need to see in not just in politics, but you need to see in leadership. You need to see people admitting that, okay, based on the information I had at my disposal, I made what I thought at the time was the best possible decision. But that does not mean that I was right. We all make mistakes. We have all made mistakes in our personal life, in our professional life, and in our political life. And the most important thing is to admit when you've made a mistake. And on that one, I'll tell you that for me, I made a mistake with CIP. That does not mean that that CIP might be right or wrong. It's just that for me, I don't support CIP, and it is something that if I had any say in, I would not value the St. Lucian citizenship, and I would not value what it means to be a St. Lucian as cheaply as we're doing. I would look at the long-term repercussions of this, and I think the long-term repercussions are much more damaging than the $100,000 that we're getting, or even if it's $200,000 or $500,000 that we're getting from the sale of a passport.
You also made reference to who should be the Minister of Finance, or what qualifies somebody to serve as Minister of Finance. Page 16, and I'm quoting there, if you're not a development, finance, or economics expert, and there is someone who is better suited for the position of Minister for Finance than you, then give him or her the portfolio.
Yes, because I think the assignment of portfolios must be on the basis of who's best suited for the job. Prime ministers like to take the Ministry of Finance because for them that's who determines how the budget is going to be spent. But Ministry of Finance is about a lot more than just putting forward a budget. Ministry of Finance and the Minister of Finance has to look at the long-term economic development prospects of the country, has to see what sort of economic trajectory he or she puts the country on, has to see how do you balance taxation with spending. The Minister of Finance has to be someone who understands economics, who understands development finance. So it isn't because you're the Prime Minister that you should automatically take the Ministry of Finance if there are people within your cabinet, within your elected members, who are better suited for it than you. And let's not fool ourselves. Even if the Prime Minister is not the Minister of Finance, we know who will make the final decision about the allocation of funds. It will not be the Minister of Finance. It will be the Prime Minister. The Minister of Finance will come to the Prime Minister for a list of proposals, a list of recommendations. The Prime Minister is the one who will have the final say. He is first among equals. The Minister of Finance is not the one who is first among equals. So what I said about the Minister of Finance holds for every single position, that what you need to do is to ensure that you have the best people running your ministries. Not design a ministry to suit someone, but ensure that in the Ministry of Health, I want the best person to manage health, particularly if it is that I'm looking to implement universal health care and there's serious health financing decisions that have to be made. I want to ensure that the person in there is capable of navigating the myriad policy decisions in there and seeing what the technocrats and the professionals bring to him or her, and making a recommendation that can then come to cabinet. So finance is no different to agriculture, to education, to health in that regard.
But you think Dr. Kenny Anthony erred by holding on to that portfolio when you had an economist in Mr. Philip J. Pierre?
No, I think the Prime Minister, Dr. Anthony, made what he felt was the best decision. He felt that he was the person best suited to handle the Ministry of Finance. I can tell you that
he doesn't have a background in...
He has a background in economics. His first degree is economics,
okay.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he figured that his background in economics and his training made him eminently qualified to be the Minister of Finance. I can tell you that let's hypothetically, that I were a Prime Minister and I had someone in my cabinet so one of my elected members who was a development finance specialist or an economist, I would not take the Ministry of Finance. My expertise is not in finance. And I would not think that I have any less authority or any less control over my cabinet because I'm not the Minister of Finance. And we have seen instances in the Caribbean where the Prime Minister is not the Minister of Finance. Barbados, Frendel Stewart is not the Minister of Finance. Chris Sinclair is the Minister of Finance. So they are, but it's more the exception than the rule.
But do you think that Mr. Philip J. Pierre is more qualified? Is he more qualified?
I wouldn't answer that, because if I answer that, you now have a whole week of sound bites from me where I'm saying that Mr. Philip Pierre should have been the Minister of Finance.
I just want an honest response from you.
No, I have no idea.
I'm not looking for any sound bites.
You're not looking for a sound bite. That's good. No, I have no idea. I can't tell you whether Mr. Pierre would have been better suited to be Minister of Finance than Dr. Anthony. That's something I can't.
On page 19, most importantly, you have written, your ministers must be honest, of sound mind, and unimpeachable character.
Absolutely.
Do you think that's a tall order in those small islands?
No, it is absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. Why would you want a minister who is dishonest? You're putting a minister in charge of your country. You're putting a minister in charge of a sector. It doesn't matter what the sector is. It could be youth development and sports. It could be health. It could be finance. It could be agriculture. Why would you want that person to be dishonest? Why would you want that person to have a character that is impeachable? Why would you want that person to have low moral values? Why would you want that person to bring your government into disrepute by his or her actions? So no, for me, these
We
are
talk
things.
about low moral values.
Yes, well, when you say unimpeachable character, that's what you're talking about. You want someone who you can go to sleep at night and wake up the next morning and not worry that this person has been involved in some scandal or has done something that will bring your government into disrepute. You have to make it very clear to your ministers that there are certain things that are non-negotiable. There are certain things, certain qualities that you will not compromise on.
But based on our standards, it appears that you're looking for a saint.
No, I'm not, because we've had these people. You've had these people serve in the cabinet. You've had many people who've served in cabinets on both sides, both for the United Workers' Party and the St. Lucia Labour Party, who fit those non-saintly characteristics very, very easily. You've had many who haven't, but you have many who have.
So why didn't you send them perennial charges of corruption? You did those charges are bandied about flippantly at SLP, government ministers, and vice versa. Even without evidence, we like to do that.
Because you need better systems of accountability. You have a situation where you have the executive and the legislative occupied primarily by the same people. Now the legislative is really supposed to keep the executive in check. You have something that's called a Public Accounts Committee that is supposed to ensure that government funds are spent properly.
And that's not functioning.
It's not
in the case of St. Lucia.
It's not functioning in the case of St. Lucia and many other jurisdictions, because the same people who sit in the executive, in the cabinet, are the ones who sit in the legislative. The legislative cannot keep the executive in check because the legislative and the executive are membet, mempuel. And that can't happen. So you must have better systems of accountability. I remember having a discussion once with the senior minister in Singapore. I was working at the OECS then, and we were on a study tour of Southeast Asia. And I said to him, Minister, I'm a little curious. Why is it that you never hear of allegations of corruption or corruption bringing down governments in Singapore? And he said to me, very simple. He said, we put a very, very high threshold. First of all, we pay our ministers well. So we ensure that they are paid the same way they would be paid if they're in the private sector. But we also tell them what is permissible and what is not permissible. So any minister coming in knows what the contract is. And once they breach that contract, they know that there is no compromise, that there is no haggling, there's no negotiating, you're out. And I think that is what we have to do. I had a very smart teacher in Common Entrance Junior Special and the St. Aloysius RC Boys Primary. And I'm saying that because today I gave out the prize for the best performing student at Common Entrance at St. Aloysius RC Boys, a bright young man by the name of Tajani Maximin. And I think these are the things we should be celebrating a lot more. The Tajani Maximins and the one who got it last year, the Richie Hyacinths of this world. You know, these names need to roll off our tongues the same way the last murder victim, or even more than the last murder victim, or the last person who was involved in some commerce rolls off our tongues. But going back to this teacher in Junior Special, and you'd never know who that teacher was. He said to me, don't ever aim to be second, third, or fourth, because if you're going into an exam and your goal is to be second, third, or fourth, then if you slip, you 5, 6, or 7. Always aim to come first. And that's what I've done. I've always aimed to come. I've not always come first, but I've always kept that as my standard. If we start lowering our standards for ministers, if we start lowering our standards for public officials, what do you think you'll get? That teacher, by the way, was Leo Clark.
Okay.
Yeah. For me to this day is one of the best teachers I've ever experienced in my entire education, because of the way Leo. And I've said it publicly. The education I got at St. Aloysius RC Boys, with people like Leo Clark and Gilroy Satney and others, really Mikey Albertin, gave me that foundation that has turned me into the person that I am today.
On page 34, and again, what comes to mind is you as former minister in the public service, and you say there, while always being cognizant of the cost of living, wage increases must also be correlated with productivity and value added.
Yes.
Now, for political reasons, very often we hear Give the public servants their money. We've heard this from former Prime Minister Dr. Kenny Anthony, and through the then Prime Minister Stephen King. Give the people their money.
Yes.
And we are paying for this. Now, do you think on the whole that
How are we paying for it?
in terms of the loans, the huge debts that we're experiencing and so on, and we basically have nothing to show for it in terms of productivity. Do you think public sector workers in St. Lucia are worthy of the kind of increases that they're normally demanding?
I have worked with some excellent public officers throughout my career as a permanent secretary, as a cabinet secretary, as a minister. The public officers I worked with in the Ministry of Public Service Information Broadcasting, the public officers I worked with in the Ministry of Sustainable Development, Energy, Science and Technology, I would carry them along with me anywhere that I go. These were people who were on the ball, who focused, who produced. You had one or two exceptions, but those public officers are public officers that I would go to bat for anytime. I don't think I was a very lucky minister in that I got the best public officers in public service and the best public officers in sustainable development. These public officers are replicated throughout the public service. You have some very, very good, very productive public officers in the public service. What you do not have, however, in the public service are proper systems, again, is this word of accountability. You don't have proper systems of goal setting. You don't have proper systems of determining what is the priority for the ministry. So again, you have this hamster syndrome where people are running and running and running, but they're not achieving what needs to happen. But to make what you read effective, there must be a very frank conversation between the government and the trade unions. There has to be a partnership, because the trade unions, the role of the trade unions is to see after the welfare of their workers, and not just welfare where remuneration is concerned, but working conditions, etc. So a government cannot on its own determine how it treats with public officers. There has to be a very frank, very open, very constructive dialogue with public officers, with trade unions, and that is something I spoke about in the book.
But who looks after the welfare of taxpayers? Because in
the government does. The government has to.
We are the ones going to be paying those salaries.
But the public officers are also taxpayers. Don't forget that. They're paying their own salaries, and they're paying for a lot of the services that everybody else enjoys. And that is why I think as a taxpayer, you have to say to your government what you want, what it is. Taxpayers are the citizenry, they are the electorate. Unfortunately, they seem to think that they only have a voice every 5 years during an election campaign. That is not the case. You have a voice every single time. You have to make that voice heard. You have to say to the politician what it is that you want, what it is that you'll tolerate. You think if you were to say to a politician now, midterm, that you will not tolerate this, you don't think he or she would pay attention, because they know in 3 years' time, when it comes time to vote, you've already said, I don't like this. You've continued to do the things that I said I don't like. What do you think I'm going to do in 3 years' time? I'm going to vote you out. Or I won't vote for you, I'll vote for somebody else. We have to understand that we have power. And we find ourselves too much like Wavet Duverpool, where politicians are concerned. You have the power, and you have to use it.
But don't you think the same is true that politicians generally will not listen to the people because they have of the mindset that they're going to win the next general election?
But history,
that's what they tell themselves.
But history is replete with examples of politicians who believe that they don't have to listen to the people and that they'll win the next election, and they've lost.
What do you think will serve the people in good stead? Reforming the constitutions, you have the power of recall, because just bellowing, just speaking out and so on, the politicians will hear you. But will they act on what you are saying? The example is there. The politicians do not act on what the people are saying.
So what would trigger...
The mechanism is not there.
What would trigger a recall? What in your mind would trigger a recall that would help this? I'm not saying that the Constitution does not need to be amended. I think the Constitution, there are certain elements of the Constitution that have to be addressed. The Senate, for example, I think the Senate is ineffective. I served in the Senate, and the Senate does not play the role that a Senate should play. It really was it grieved me to see people like my very good friend, Dr. Stephen King, and Berthia Pal, who are both professionals, who leave their work to come into the Senate to debate bills, only to know that if everybody on the government side decides that bill is going through, even if they side with the three people on the opposition, that bill will go through with no amendment. Now, that can't be right. But if it is that the lower house, the House of Assembly, has given an instruction to the leader of government business in the Senate that we don't want this bill to be delayed in the Senate, it must go through. Everybody will toe the party line, will toe the government line, and the bill will go through. Now, that's not constructive. So maybe what we need to do is you look at a unicameral system where the senators sit in this one chamber and they have their voice. So when this bill is being debated, everybody's views are taken on board, because as it is currently constituted, the Senate really is not playing you have very good debates in the Senate, but the Senate, as far as its influence on decision making, is negligible. So there are things that have to be adjusted, but I don't think the Constitution needs to be just thrown out. I think things like local government will need to be addressed, because you must have proper systems of local government so that people feel empowered. People feel that there are things that they should not have to go to a minister of infrastructure to do, that the parliamentary representative of a functioning local government system can do on their behalf. And that all speaks to the empowerment of people. For me, that is the most important thing, Timothy. And I don't think that in empowering people, you weaken government. I think in empowering people, you strengthen government, because government is now spreading that burden of decision making, is spreading the burden of implementation once it gives the people the information and the resources that are required.
Because just allow me to reiterate that Doc, clearly people are speaking out.
Yes.
Especially with all the talk shows and so on, people are speaking out. People maybe not writing as often in terms of letters to the editors. That thing is archaic now.
Yes,
but people are calling all the different talk shows.
They're putting stuff on Facebook and right.
But the governments are not listening to the people. But let me go into another.
The government is hearing you. The government may not be. Government may not be showing that it's acting. But and again, as I said, we've seen examples where the government has not listened to the people, and the government is voted out. So it's a government that does not listen to the people does so at its peril.
What does the trend say? What you're reading from the trend of? It appears that after every general election these days, you have a new government taking place.
It's an interesting phenomenon. I think it suggests that people are not happy with the trajectory that they see the country in. So it's a case of taking one out and putting another one in. So okay, let's see what happens. I think it's calling for a much deeper approach to our development. Clearly, what we have right now is not what the people want. No, the people have not seen it necessary to give any government more than 5 years in office, and that's saying something. That is sending a very strong signal to both parties that we need to change the way in which we do things. What we're doing right now is not working. The toxicity of the call and response, the tiwe mete, is not working. We have to find something that appeals to people and makes them want to be better. To do better. We have to inspire people, and maybe that's what the people are saying to the politicians. That's what the people are saying, and we're not listening. That's the message that is being sent out. People can't always articulate things as well as you can, and as well as other people can. But in what they're not saying, they're making a very powerful statement, and I think that's what we have to do. We have to recognize that the people are saying, and also you have to look at the voting trends. There are a lot of people who are staying away from the process, who are saying to you that, you know what, this is working for me. I'm really happy with what's going on there. And that, again, is a very strong signal that we have to pay attention to.
Page 49. Appropriate and affordable housing programs are important, and housing development should be undertaken with a view toward creating safe, interactive, and healthy communities. Now, this is sorely lacking. I read a book in its entirety, and I noted that when was the last housing project in St. Lucia? Because this growing up, you had Sans Souci,
Entrepot.
You had Entrepot, Independent City, where I grew up and so on. But when did you have those developments of late occurring? And government after government made reference to those projects, whether it's SLP or UWP, but they have not delivered.
And it's not just a matter of putting up houses, but it's, as this says, creating safe spaces. So it must be a housing development that pays attention to the fact that people must have a way of interacting with each other and recreating. So it's not that I'm putting up a housing development and everybody's going to stay inside their homes and watch cable television and the children are going to play on their PS4 and their Xbox. But you want them to interact. You want there to be a community spirit. So you have to design the community in such a way that you will cause that to happen. You need to put in place a community center where people can go in, can network, can have meetings, and these things are lacking. So it's not just putting down the physical buildings, putting down the infrastructure, but it's making it sustainable. It's making the human connections that are so sorely lacking right now. And I think that is part of the problem, that we are so focused on just putting things down and claiming credit and ticking off a box. So I said I'll do 2 housing developments. I've done 2 housing developments. I said I'll provide homes for 30 people. I'll provide houses for 30 people. But I've not really created a community. I grew up I was born in Central Castries, but my best friends lived in Sans Souci. I spent almost all of my life as a teenager at St. Mary's College and at A-level college in Sans Souci. Sans Souci had a vibrancy about it. There was a you were playing on the VG field or going around the community. You don't get that anymore. And I think these are some of the things that we have to recreate. And I don't want anyone to tell me that these are different times. It cannot happen. I think that's a self-pity and that's a self-defeatist thing that you're talking about. We have to cause it to happen.
You think it's a lack of vision, or those housing projects, the whole idea, those have died with people like Sir John Compton and Romanus Lancico?
I think there is, again, a lack of proper priority setting. The country is also different. The country is no longer the green field that Sir John Compton and the late Romanus Lancico inherited. You have. It's not as easy to put down developments the way they did, and there are things that need to be done a little bit differently now, but I think it really is a lack of vision. Might be part of it, leadership and proper priority setting.
Another area addressed, page 52. The serious threat now posed by climate change makes it essential that environmental management and climate change adaptation are mainstreamed into the work of every agency. Now that that's a buzzword, climate change, and we're seeing the effects following this very hectic hurricane season. But before that, prior to that, people are not taking note in terms of governments allocating resources to carefully chosen or established agencies to look at issues of that nature. Do you think this is changing now? And incidentally, our prime ministers, I think from Mr. King to our prime minister now, they have been responsible for sustainable development of CARICOM and climate change.
They are taking it more seriously, and I was at the South Louis Memorial Lecture that I presented at, where I looked at the economic implications of climate change in the Caribbean. Somebody actually asked me that question: how do you climate smart a politician? And I said, I think the environment that the politicians are living in is climate smarting them, because they realize that they have to pay attention to it. But it's not just the extreme weather events. It's not just the Hurricane Maria or the Hurricane Irma. It's also the slow onset impacts. It's also the things that are creeping up on you. So it's a sea level rise that will cause a lot of the land that you now take for granted, a lot of the coastal lands that you take for granted, they will no longer be around in 2050 or 2070 or 2075. It has to cause you to revisit where you put developments down. So for example, the debate raging over DSH, for me, is a totally different debate. When I look at the climate change modeling data, it suggests to me that sea level rise will take over almost all of those lands where those buildings are being put down. So I'm not even so concerned about the CIP impacts of DSH. I'm more concerned about the climate change impacts that climate change will have on that development. I'm more concerned about the developments that are taking place in an unplanned manner that are destroying our watersheds. And St. Lucia is already a water insecure country. So when we go around destroying mangroves, when we go around putting down developments in watersheds or allowing activity to take place in close proximity to watersheds, we are saying to ourselves that in 10 years' time, you will be in a water insecure country. You will be living in a community that WASCO, doesn't matter how much money you give to WASCO, will not be able to supply you with water. These are some of the long-term things that we have to think of. So it's not just extreme weather events of hurricanes, but it's also droughts. It's also ocean acidification that is taking place, and that's causing shellfish to now not form their shells anymore, or corals to start bleaching. So people who come down to St. Lucia to dive don't want to dive and see dead white corals. These are all things that we have to look at. We must have an integrated development plan for this country. And I'm sorry, Timothy, but we have not had one for a long time. We have not approached development in an integrated manner. We have not determined what are the resources that we need. We have not looked at human resource development in an integrated manner, in a long-term manner. And these are the things that we have to do. We have to do things differently. We have to determine what kind of St. Lucia we want. How do we create that St. Lucia, that better St. Lucia that your children and your grandchildren can enjoy the same quality of life that you did and your parents did? I can tell you right now that the St. Lucia we're creating will not give our children and grandchildren the same quality of life that we enjoyed and our parents and grandparents enjoyed. And that is a very serious indictment on us.
You're watching Newsmaker Live. Stand by. Your calls when we come back. watching Newsmaker Live on DBS Television. We are into the 22nd season. We'll put the telephone number on screen right now so that you can call with your questions and comments. How can viewers purchase the book?
The book is available at St. Lucia Books at the Varmos bookstore, and I think right now they're also operating at the Castries City Hall. It's also available at the Folk Research Center, and as of Saturday, it will be available at T&M Toy and Stationery Store in Viewfort. In fact, I'm doing a book signing in Viewfort on Saturday morning from 10:30 to 1 o'clock.
Okay. We have a caller 9. Good evening. Go ahead, please.
Good evening, Tim, and good evening, Dr. Fletcher.
Hi, good evening to you, caller.
Dr. Fletcher?
Yes, sir. Good evening.
Okay, as the former Minister of Public Utilities, what do you think of, you were the Minister of all public utilities, no?
Yes, I was.
Right.
Yes, I was.
And after that, they broke up, I think into no less than 4 or 5 different ministers, okay?
Yes.
First, I would like to get your view on what you think the impact of that has been on the management of the public utilities, and where you think, given the enormous amount of work that had gone into the regulation, especially of public utilities on this island, that how where you think we are now with regards to what we put in and what's happening now. I mean, just talk a bit of what you think of public utilities now.
Okay.
Okay, my brother.
Yes.
Thank you so much for calling, sir.
Yes, caller. The caller has raised a very important point, Timothy. One of the things that happened after the elections was the energy portfolio, for example, was split. So renewable energy went to Minister Gail Regobert, and utility, the management of Lucelec went to Minister Stevenson King. That created significant problems, and it's a problem that, for me, needs to be resolved, because even in the minds of the development partners, they're not quite sure who to work with. Water, what the caller quite rightly pointed out, we established a National Utilities Regulatory Commission that has responsibility for both water and electricity. But what you have now is that the water sector has found itself in the Ministry of Agriculture, which itself has certain issues because agriculture is a user of water. So you're almost like putting the rat to guard the cheese. But water is in agriculture, and the utility, Lucelec, is with the Ministry of Infrastructure. So which minister has responsibility for the National Utilities Regulatory Commission? Is it now that you have to disband the National Utilities Regulatory Commission and go back to the old National Water and Sewerage Commission, which handled only water, and then go back to the old situation that you had with Lucelec with a review board that sets the tariff? But if you do that, it means that everything that you need to put in place to allow independent power producers to come in and have investments in wind and geothermal and solar, all of that now is in jeopardy. So, and again, it's something I speak about in the book. We have to take our time with the allocation of portfolios, look at what works, look at what is there, before we hastily rush in. And I also am a firm proponent of fixing portfolios. The United States of America, there's one Department of Homeland Security, one Department of... It doesn't matter whether it's Republicans or Democrats in office. I think what we need to do is to fit a minister to a ministry rather than keeping on fitting ministries to whoever you have. Doesn't work.
I think we have a call. Thanks for holding on, caller. Go ahead, please. Hello? We have lost the caller? Okay, we lost the caller. So we'll continue to take your calls. Once again, you are watching Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television with my guest, Dr. James Fletcher. We have a call. Good evening. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good evening, Tim.
Hi, good evening to you, caller.
Good evening, Dr. Fletcher.
Good evening.
Let me tell you, I heard your comments and your words, Dr. Fletcher. You were talking about the people of the country, the government doesn't have a voice, so that's why you're having an election every 5 years. But you have to, there's a technicality in the thing. The government is, those who want to get into power have all those technicalities to bring in to make the people believe that they will do a better job. For example, we had the former government who had implemented the tax 50%. And you find the opposition now was so willing to get into power. They preach to the people saying how they will bring the tax down, they will bring that, they will stop the crime, they will do all these kind of impossible things that they now people of St. Lucia are a nation where we believe in people's words. You know, we take words for granted. Like, you say you'll do that, you say you'll do this, you say you'll stop that, you will stop this. So we vote for you. We vote for you. So then you find a government cannot last more than 5 years, and which is very bad. People have to observe when a government is coming in those technicalities that are not true, and that is impossible unless we of this country don't observe the words of these technicalities of the politicians. It will always be very chaos for a government to last a few years.
Okay, thanks a lot. On page 2, the prologue, you did say successive political leaders and politicians have perpetuated the belief that most of the difficulties facing the country have been brought on by the poor governance provided by the opposing party during its term in office.
Yes, that's the diet that's fed to the people, that if you vote me in, I will be able to solve all of the problems that first of all I've identified as being problems, and once you vote me in, I will be able to solve all these problems. And that's the honesty I think that's missing from our politics. The point the caller makes is a very important one, and I think that's why we need civil society. The media has a very important role to play, to speak truth to power, but also to fact check and to say, okay, this is what the government says, this is what the opposition says, but this is an alternative. These are the facts. NGOs have an important role to play, and what you must not have is the government trying to silence or intimidate people from bringing that information out.
We have a call. Good evening.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening to you, sir.
I would like to thank Dr. Fletcher for his book.
Thank you.
But I have not read the book. I need to know something.
Yes.
I always query about why politicians always come out, within the 4 years, 5 years, to expose all the ills of government. And I don't know if it's a political campaign strategy in terms of getting votes. But if there are so many problems in government, why is all around election time you're hearing this one ready to sue this one and that one, and all those things are all dividing the people? Is it a strategy, or is it that our people are not wise enough to ask, the...
Hello?
We lost the call.
Okay, we lost the call, but go ahead. You got
I think the people are wise. I think the people make wise decisions. And I think you found that the electorate is a lot more sophisticated than we give them credit for. I think the electorate is able to see through what works and what doesn't work. There are still things that are said that maybe cause people to move in a particular direction. There are things that are said to induce people to do certain things that may not be the case, and you have that everywhere. But I think the electorate is a lot more discerning. What the electorate needs, however, is access to information, and that's what needs to happen. We need to find a way to make that information available. And if the government does not want to make that information available, everyone else, civil society, the media, NGOs, everyone has that responsibility to educate the people around them, to let them see what is going on. And I can't overstress the importance of the media in this regard. I know it's very easy to chase the sexy story, to chase the what's going on in the House of Assembly and who says what and who did what, but I think the media also has a responsibility to elevate the discussion above that and to start saying to people, these are the facts, you make your decision, you decide whether what you're being presented with by either political party is what is in your best interest.
Good evening. Go ahead with your contribution, caller.
Yeah, good night.
Hi, good evening to you, sir.
Hi.
Mr. Fletcher.
Yes, sir.
Get ready for your Nobel Prize for the environment.
Thank you.
That's going to be bestowed on you anytime. It could be this year, next year, anytime. Get ready for that.
Thank you very much,
The next Nobel
caller.
laureate will be you.
Thank you, caller.
I'm calling from Ancillary.
Thank you so very much. Thanks for that recognition. Thank you. Even if I don't get it, just you telling me that I deserve it is better than any Nobel Prize that I can ever get. But thank you so very much.
Why do you have a passion for the environment?
I have a passion for St. Lucia. And the environment is St. Lucia. The environment, I have a passion for St. Lucia, for St. Lucians, for my country. And that passion is just as much expressed in my passion for the arts, my expression for the young people to want to see them better. The environment was a portfolio that I had in the last term of office, but my passion is for St. Lucia.
You have a call. Good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, good evening to you, sir.
Good night, Jimmy.
Hi,
Happy
good
New
night.
Year to both of you.
Thank you
Yeah,
very
same
much.
to you.
Jimmy, I have not read your book, So it's kind of difficult for him to comment on it.
But why is that? You're one of the first people I would have thought would have read it.
All right, I'll read it.
Okay, good.
But I want to commend you for defending the hard-working public officers. Too many persons on the outside who will manage a few thousands of dollars figure out they are better managers than the public officers who manage millions of dollars. And you pointed out your people in sustainable development, etc. I had on many occasions had to praise and commend those officers, especially in sustainable development. You know, how they took charge, how they were organized, the channel and all of them, you know.
Right.
I saw that. When it was due to them, I did so. Now, I do not know where cooperatives, where you place cooperatives in your book in terms of, because in governance of this country, I think that we need a cooperative philosophy for St. Lucia since 1974 when James D. Bousquet had a policy for the cooperative development. Some of my friends have been asking me, how can you do it? I point out to them that the Mondragon cooperative, which was started by a Jesuit priest in Spain, the Basque region, started with education. Things were bad, people, depression. And you educated the people, you went out educating them, and they started small. Now they're big. Same thing was done in Canada, in Antigonish, where Moses Cody and Jimmy Tompkins, the depression, things were bad, and they actually had home education, home studies, but the cooperative model, business model. And explain to people how taking charge of their own businesses, right, their own affairs, made them stronger. Moses Cody actually wrote, being charged of your own destiny,
Okay.
Masters of your own destiny, that's the name of the book. Right?
But in the interest of time, do you have a question?
Hello?
In the interest of time, do you have a question?
Okay, yes. I'm interested in time, yes. So, Jimmy, where do you see that in terms of the governance of this country? And one more thing is that we had started a public sector reform.
Right.
All right? I remember even the CSA from that point of view, we have a white paper on public sector reform. And to me, it just stopped. It halted. The work of Mark Lee, when Mark Lee was director, etc., I remember I was involved with that. Mm-hmm. We were doing very well as far as I was concerned. Then all of a sudden, to me, it stopped. So while people are talking about the Constitution, etc., to me, we needed that reform in terms of how we delivered, how people understood their roles. Because you made a point about, the politician people are running, is that the politician is the policy maker. So Alan is right when he says that he's a board, but the managers are the PSCs and the heads of departments, and they are the ones that must manage the process, not the policy maker.
Okay.
I'll listen to you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The point about cooperatives is a very important one, and while I do not speak directly to cooperatives, the entire book speaks about empowering people, and the caller is absolutely right. Cooperatives are about empowering people. It's about helping people make their own decisions, helping people manage their own resources, helping people do things for themselves, and that is what is throughout this book. The question of public sector reform is quite important. I was actually part of that process in the early stages. It started with Mr. Leighton Thomas when he appointed these committees. I was actually on one of the committees that continued with Mark Lee. I must, again, another mea culpa, I must say that during my tenure as Minister of the Public Service, we did not do enough in advancing the work of public sector reform. We focused a lot on the e-government side, on using technology to improve processes in the public service. We did a little bit on business process reengineering, but we did not go down enough to the nitty-gritty of public sector reform, which is absolutely important. But again, with public sector reform, you have to look at accountability.
We have a call. Good evening. Hello.
Yes.
Hi, good evening to you, sir.
Yeah, I must say, I listen to your program, and I must say, I'll give kudos to your guest, although I'm not really a fan of his, but tonight he's spoken with a bit of intellectual capacity. Because what he mentioned in reference to the DSH, I never actually took it. Find myself watching as to when he did mention it, especially in reference to the environment. And we've got to be very careful with this. As much as we will want the best for St. Lucia, but we have to look at the interest of, in case, there is some form of weather condition, and he spoke some sense there, and that should have us to revisit what we are doing on that DHS program. I'm for it, but at the same time, there are other stuff that needs to be done before we can give our go-ahead on this thing. Okay then?
All right, thank you so much.
Paula.
I appreciate the contribution. We await another call. Once again, my guest this evening is Dr. James Fletcher, and he has just written the book, Governing in a Small Island State. We have another call. Hello, good evening. Go ahead with your contribution, caller.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the show.
Hello.
Hello?
Hi, good evening to you.
Hello?
Mr. Producer, please take care of this for me, please. There's a feedback. Go ahead, caller.
Yeah, okay, I'll do so.
Yes, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, I'm listening to you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to ask Mr. Fletcher a question about, I don't know if I'm wrong, but I want to know, I think I heard when he was in power, with the Labour Party, right? You talk about the Wi-Fi.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Because I see children sitting underneath trees everywhere by the road trying to catch the Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
I need to know if this government now have any plan for doing the same thing you had.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
I just read that the Prime Minister is going ahead with the project that we conceptualized with the Taiwanese, which actually had already been funded to do the GINet, the Government Island-wide Network. But that's actually part of a much broader project that looked at community ICT centers that we had started implementing and which have not, I think it's something that this government needs to continue with, because there were many community ICT centers that had to be established. There was also an EduConnect project that went with that, where all of the libraries and schools would be given broadband internet. I don't know how far they've gone with that. There's also the Government Unified Communication Network. So there are many planks to that at the end of the day, you'd basically have blanket Wi-Fi coverage and community centers, libraries, ICT centers where people could go and use devices, do networking, have meetings. So it was a much broader plan for the country, and it's one of these things that I'm hoping that Mr. Shastri and his government implement, because it really will redound to the benefit of all St. Lucians.
Hello, good evening to you, caller. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Good evening, Tim.
Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening, Dr. Fletcher.
Good evening. How are you?
Doc, let me first confess that I have not yet read your book.
I know, and I'll say the same thing that I said to the previous caller, that you were one of the first I would have thought to have read it. But that's okay, you're forgiven.
but I will. Let me hasten to add that I will.
I know you will.
But listening to Timothy pose questions to you from some of the content in your book, I listened to you articulate your responses very effectively.
Thank you.
You were very articulate. You know your stuff. I'm not going to say you seem to. You know your stuff.
He wrote the book. He wrote the book.
About your responses. Your responses were logical, analytical, great stuff.
Thank you very much.
However, let me point out to you, Dr. Fletcher, that quite a lot of the stuff that you spoke about, Doc, a lot of that stuff has been said before you.
I know.
I'm sure you know that.
I know.
A lot of that stuff has been said before.
And written about in different places. I know.
Yes.
Yeah.
The problem is, and you mentioned that, how do we get the people of this country? Because we always talk about this participatory democracy that we have. But the thing is, participation seems to be lacking in this participatory democracy that we always talk about, that we give a lip service to. The thing is, look, unless and until we can get the people of this country, and you mentioned again information, people getting information or having access to the information that they need in order to make informed decisions. How do we get the people to participate, really participate in the decision-making process when it comes to the development of this country. I remember several years ago, I called Timothy Pollio's show. I think it was Newspin. And I said to him, Timothy, in terms of the problems that we face, in not just in St. Lucia, but in the region, what we need is a revolution. And I went on to, although I went on to say what I meant by the revolution, I said we need a revolution along the lines of the Renaissance in Europe. And again, I went on to add, failure on our part to have that type of revolution might very well result in the other type of revolution that nobody wants to talk about. But you see, the thing is, Doc, we need to begin to re-educate our people. Not just educate, but re-educate our people in terms of participating in it. Because if we leave it just to the politicians, it will never happen. Because politicians, we know, are famous for protecting their turf. Politicians want to be seen, especially government politicians, want to be seen as this overall godfather, taking care of the needs of especially certain people. So the thing is, how do we begin this education, this re-education process, so we can begin to have our people participating, really participating in our democracy? Thanks.
Thank you so much for calling.
It's an excellent question, Andrew, and it's actually a frightening question for politicians, because that education you're speaking about and that empowerment of people is something that I think scares a lot of politicians, because they then see people as having too much influence and too much ability to influence things. And it's something that you have to call for and you have to insist on and you have to push back against all the time, because he's absolutely right. You can't, and it goes back to my point. I don't care who are the 17 people that you elected, and out of that 17, which 14 you put in your cabinet, they are still the minority of intelligence in the country. There are many, many more people outside who have the ability and who have expertise and experience in other areas who can help in moving this country forward. And I think that's where we have to change that conversation. We have to, there's a level of toxicity in our conversation right now. There's a level of very unfortunate myopia in our conversation right now, and we have to rise above that, because if not, we will be, in fact, we're already being left behind, and it's something that I would not want to see as a solution.
We have our final call on line. Good evening. Hello.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, good evening to you, ma'am. You're our final caller.
Okay, good night. Dr. Fletcher?
Yes.
Very inspiring. Huh?
Thank you.
Yes. I was just listening to you about that hamster situation you spoke about in the public service.
No, in St. Lucia, not just in St. Lucia, yes.
I'm looking at the public service, and you just spoke about public sector reform, and I'm hearing Dr. Leighton Thomas. That's from the 70s.
Well, actually, it was Sir Leighton was 19 when he appointed me to head one of the committees. It was in 1996 when Dr. Vaughan Lewis was Prime Minister. But you're right. I mean, it's 20-something years ago.
Yes. So what do you think is the problem? And you just mentioned you all concentrated on e-governance and process re-engineering rather than public sector reform. What do you think the priority should be now? And why you think we're still talking about public sector reform 20 years after and nothing has been done?
Thank you so much for calling.
We focused on e-government and business process re-engineering as one small component of public sector reform, but we didn't look at the other areas. We didn't look at the many of the things that were articulated in that white paper that Mark Louis and the others with him developed. There has to be a very frank conversation about public sector reform that involves everyone, not just the government, but the trade unions, the Civil Service Association, Police Welfare Association, the teachers. Everybody has to get involved in this conversation for us to determine what sort of public service we require to be able to support the kind of country. Because all of this has to be for a particular reason. We are looking to develop a country. We're looking to improve our quality of life. We're looking to be able to sustain ourselves. We're looking to be viable. How does the public service fit in? And what sort of structures do we need in the public service? What sort of interactions do we need in the public service? How does the public service relate to its clientele? All of these things have to be dealt with. And unfortunately, some of the work that Mark did is a little dated now because things have changed so much. But it's work that must happen. But there's also, I think, a broader conversation that must take place of, again, where do we see ourselves as solutions? What are the things that matter to us? What do we chase? Do we chase foreign direct investment at the expense of the local investor, the local business person whose blood, sweat, and tears have been invested in this country and who has nowhere to go when his or her concessions run out? Should we not be focusing on that person and helping them to be the best person? Should we not be focusing on people like Joanne Dujour, who is doing work with Sargassum seaweed and is taking a problem and converting it into something, or the gentleman in Labrie that has taken that has made a solar desal. I think his name is something Leo, Darren Leo. Should we not be promoting these people? Should we not be looking at somebody like Tariba Hinson, who is doing Membed bags and helping Tariba so that Membed bags, and people might say I'm dreaming, but Membed bags become as big as Coach or Michael Kors? Why not? Why can't that happen? Why do we have to go and bring in Michael Kors into St. Lucia when we have a Michael Kors already in Tariba Hinson? We have people here who have the ability. Something you may not know, Timothy, but the featherless snake that we make a big fuss about, and there was all this brouhaha about eating snakes. The featherless snake, the venom from the featherless snake, is retailing for $250 a gram at the Kentucky Wildlife Zoo. You know why? Because the venom of the featherless snake, Bothrops caribe, has been shown to have symptoms when you get bitten by a snake to be similar to what you get with capillary thrombosis. So they believe that the venom from the featherless snake might actually unlock some keys in helping us to deal with certain heart diseases. Now, should we not be investing in that, working for our universities, or maybe getting someone down there who can work with us, so that whatever drug is created to deal with heart disease from that featherless snake, be it Pfizer or Glaxo or Merck or whatever, every time that drug is sold, and every time you look at ABC or CBS and you see an advertisement for this drug, you know that St. Lucia is getting serious royalties, much more than the sale of any passport can bring. These are the kinds of things that we have to do. There's an intrinsic value to this country that we're diminishing and we're devaluing. And for me, that's the biggest quevche, if I can use the Creole. Mm-hmm. We have to value what is St. Lucian, and we have to value St. Lucians and what St. Lucians can do. And that's something I'm very strong about, and that's something I'm very passionate about. And it's something that unless I can see happen, I will not rest, because there is so much talent, so much quality, so much ability in this country that we're ignoring in search of something else that's out there.
Final comments from you, sir?
I want this to start a conversation. I mean, the book, yes, is my gift. Well, it's not a gift because it's not free. Unfortunately, it's my contribution to a conversation I think that must take place about creating a better St. Lucia, about valuing ourselves differently, about determining what sort of country we want to create, what mechanism we use to create that country, what role you and I can play, and for me, most importantly, getting above the political fray, as you say that I try to do. And in the period between elections, seeing ourselves as St. Lucians who are working towards one common thing, and that is the development of our country and the development of all of us for us. And that governments will come and governments will go, but they have to understand that the only thing that matters is developing this country for St. Lucians. So I'm hoping that this book can start that conversation, can start it in Balka, can start it in Asukanal, and can start it in Bas Laguas, and that people can now start talking about the kind of country they want to create, quite apart from what any politician, be it government or opposition, says.
Again, how can the book be purchased?
The book can be purchased at T&M Toy and Stationery Store in Vieux Fort from Saturday, and from the Folk Research Center, and from Valmore's, and also the St. Lucia City Hall from St. Lucia Books. Delia Foswa is doing an excellent job promoting St. Lucian books. And as more outlets come online, I will inform people. And it's also available on Amazon in Kindle format. So people who want to read the digital format can go on Amazon and buy it. And some copies are also available from me, and that comes with a free autograph.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Fletcher, for being my guest. You penned the book Governing in a Small Island State. Is that
Caribbean Island State?
In a Caribbean. It's Governing in a Small
Caribbean
Island State, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
That's my first book, but I'm going to follow it up with one on climate change that I'll call From Castries to Paris, my climate change journey. That's going to come
we look forward to
later this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching the broadcast and contributing via your calls. If it's Wednesday, it's Newsmaker Live, and this has been the case over the last 22 years. Time now for the clip that beat.
C'est compliqué.
Once again, that's the broadcast. My name is Timothy Paulios. A very good evening. See you next time.